preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I'd like to introduce the two people I brought with me. Ms. Anita Berger is the Senior Supervisor of the New Jersey Odyssey, and Mr. Gilmore DeGap has the odd distinction of being the Odyssey House cartologist. In other words, he draws cartoons, he draws charts, he draws flow sheets, he does that kind of thing, and he works in the administrative staff. They'll tell you a little bit about themselves later. Both of them are graduates of the Odyssey House program. I don't have any really formal speech to give you today. I'd rather respond to the kind of questions and things you'd like to know and to talk rather freely. Since this was first announced, or I was asked to speak here, which was as early as last September, a great deal has happened, and I guess you know a great deal about Odyssey and a great deal about myself. We feel very strongly that the main function of a private voluntary agency is to do just what Odyssey has been doing in the last few weeks. That is, that because we are not tied to any political system, we are not tied to any bureaucracy, we can say it as we see it. And we began as early as last August to warn the officials and to request adequate response to what we thought was going to be an epidemic of addiction. Needless to say, it has gone far out of proportion to even what we had anticipated. Our first proposal in August, believe it or not, was for 40 beds. When I think of the thought of asking for 40 beds for children, in light of what we see today, I really think that I must have also been having the wool over my eyes at that time. In fact, we will be holding a press conference tomorrow. We have had, since Monday, 3 deaths within a 1-block area in New York under the age of 17, and 4 children hospitalized in extremis. And yet, we still stay today without a single funded adolescent treatment bed in the state of New York. So that it really is a very amazing situation that we are facing. Prior actually to this summer, we saw addiction primarily in people in their early 20s with an onset of about 17, 18, and 19. We did not see what we are seeing today, which is huge groups of children, 50 and 60% of certain public schools using hard drugs. This is a totally different phenomenon, and the best way of describing it is to say it's like short skirts and long hair or maxi coats. It has as much underlying pathology as that. It is the fad, it is the thing to do, it is the way to be with it in the younger generation, and to look for any deeper pathology than adolescent peer pressure is not to really appreciate the epidemic and serious nature of what we are facing. And I say this as a parent, who I think some of you may have read. I became as committed to this when my own 10-and-a-half-year-old Chapin was off of drugs. And when she was 10-and-a-half and was off of drugs at the beginning of this year, I said that no matter how good the home is, eventually I will not be able to isolate my child from everything everybody else she knows is doing. And that if I, in a sense, constantly demand that she differ from all her peers, I will, in a sense, be making her sick in a different way. If every 15 and 16-year-old is smoking pot, and you say to your child, you cannot, and your child follows, that child is left out. There's no other way of looking at it. We cannot raise our children in isolation from other families. No matter how good the home is, we cannot isolate them from what they want. And this is, I think, a very important thing to understand about adolescence. The normal, healthy adolescent goes from the values of his family to the values of his peer group. This is normal maturational development. You go from what your mother and father told you to what your friends think are right. I'll tell you how old I am. I thought Sinatra was marvelous. So And I yelled and screamed and oohed and awed over Sriracha. When I think of it now, I wonder where I was at, particularly watching him in the paper being subpoenaed to New Jersey. I really wonder where I was at. But it was a very exciting time, and everybody else I knew was doing the same. My mother didn't understand. My father certainly didn't understand. He was a great many years older. And yet, all my other friends did it. This is exactly what is happening now. Our generation does not understand drug use, and rightfully so. I'm not saying we should understand it. But we will have to understand it enough so that we will be able to communicate why it is a no-no, rather than to just say it is a no-no. It's the same kind of thing when there was freeing up of sexual restrictions. It's all that kind of generation gap which we will have to really bridge in a meaningful way about drugs, because the children have taken a rebellious stand on something which is life-threatening. And we did not, fortunately, with Sinatra or the Beatles or rock music, pick as our form of adolescent expression something as dangerous as these children pick. There is no question when we first began to talk about this, and I really am pre-associated, when we began to talk about this, we thought we had until the summer of '70 to prevent it from going across the United States. And in my first statements that some of you may have seen, I said what will happen is that when New York children pack the heroin in their bobby socks to camp, we will be in difficulty. And it will then go to children from all over the country. The reality is that after the first announcements came, and we did not make any noise, and none of you really heard much about it, from August until December. And we tried to go through the front door, as they say. In other words, we met with governors' representatives, we met with mayors' representatives. We did everything but confrontation politics, because some of you may have some feelings about confrontation politics. I used to have a lot of feelings about confrontation politics until I saw that it meant that children were dying, and then there was no real choice. But from the months of August until January, we tried to do it in a quiet way. I can only tell you from deep sadness, there is no other way of doing it. And that's part of the reason that we are in as much trouble as we are. The only way that responsible change is going to be made is by this kind of thing. Some of you may have heard about a very good friend of ours, who was a priest, who was ejected from City Hall yesterday. He will be arrested today. He's down there. I have the deepest respect for Father Giganti. In fact, he is the one that opened the convent that allowed us to first treat these children. Realities are that many of us in the more affluent parts of society no concept of how really bad it is in certain parts of the city, and how constantly nobody responds in any responsible way. And we could tell you some things about Hunts Point later on if you're interested in that, and we'd certainly be willing to show you some of the things that he's talking about and some of the reasons or some of the ways, in a sense, that we will have to become responsible in order to turn drug addiction around. And that may seem like a non sequitur, but one of the things that is alienating the younger generation is their total disrespect for us, and some of their disrespect is based on very valid points. In reality, however, since we first made the announcement, we have received, and the other director is now on consultation the next few days, in such places as Waterloo, Michigan, Fenton, Ohio, Eaglesville, Pennsylvania, which is a federal grant for heroin addiction, Toledo, where else? Delaware, Iowa. I cannot tell you how across the United States heroin is running already. Why it happened before the summer is impossible to tell. But it seems that there are, and heroin is of a much better quality, by the way, outside of New York. It's a much less cut. It's sold in the old forms of caps instead of glassine bags, which is much stronger. In places like Green Valley, Virginia, where some of our workers went recently, as much as 70 and 80% of the high school has been using. And this is something we cannot imagine. I can just give you some very lovely statistics. I've seen consults from Spence. I've seen consults from Ms. Hewitts, of course. I've seen consults from Chapin. Last year, actually, there's none in Chapin this year, if you're glad to see. When I applied for my son to be admitted to collegiate, I withdrew his application because I was smoking in the halls, and I resented the fact that as I walked in, I smelled pot, and so I withdrew the application. I mean, that kind of thing, though I know it's in all schools, the fact that the children were openly doing it at a time of applications of prospective parents was more thumbing the nose than even I could take. So that it's in those schools. Odyssey House, a sister agency, has done a survey of a mid-Manhattan all-girls public school in which 8% of the girls are hooked on heroin and 53.5% have used heroin or other drugs. So that we are not now talking about small groups, we're not talking about other people's children, we're not talking about even a minority. We are unfortunately beginning to talk about what the majority of children are doing. We have to realize, too, that whether or not a person becomes addicted, like with the Dishman girl that you may have read about at Columbia, that was the first time that she ever tried heroin. And one time can be fatal. It isn't that you have to wait a long time. Those of you who have children, it's one experiment that can at times eliminate that child. I think that there is some suggestion that the 16-year-old honor students who died yesterday in the Bronx also had begun for the first time. So that there are, at least many of these children are using 3, 4, and 5 months. We opened the center in October, as I said before, still unfunded. Some of you may have read we have been given the old evangelical Deaconess Hospital now in Brooklyn. It will house 400 children. I have very grave doubts as to why we were given it. I think the city thinks that it will be an albatross and we'll starve ourselves out of existence, because though they gave us the building, they did not give us any money. And to house and care for 400 children on a private voluntary agency basis is really going to be very, very difficult. Just as an aside, as to the kind of concepts our government has, and I've become really quite iconoclastic, I went through the building with Mr. Justice Goldberg's firm, and we said we would take it as is. I don't even know if Gilmore knows this. We accepted it. It had beds, it had some dishes, it had kitchen equipment, etc. And we said we would take it, though it had needed a lot of repair. The city accepted it. We were supposed to get the keys, and they held up the keys. And the Chauncey Street Block Association called me yesterday and said, did I know the city had moved up moving vans and was taking out all the beds? So that I'm only suggesting to you the realities of the fact that now they're going to store these beds in some other empty building, because it would be better to store the beds than to allow the children in New York any care. I can't say it any other way, because I have never in my life. Why? Why?
I'll help you understand.
I'll start to cry. Do you know, I was late this morning because my asthma attack last night was so bad that I was up for 4.5 hours. I have never in my life seen political fighting over the lives and bodies of our children. I cannot even describe to you what we have been through, what we have seen, the nonsense, and the fact that these kids are dying left and right. And the total irresponsibility. I mean, I can't even respond to since August they've known this, and there is absolutely no concern. I can't even describe.
How do you deal with this? Which part do you get this? I mean, the mayor seems to be with you. Is nobody else there with you?
No, it's not that the mayor is not. The mayor, the interesting thing is whether it's real or not. The very beginning, they said that we were making it up. Yeah, that was the first thing. They said we were making it up. The realities are you can't make up death statistics, and the kids keep dying. There was no question in our mind as we sat that in induction or in admissions offices that we were seeing 12, 13, and 14-year-old kids. We've seen them as young as 9. We'd never seen them before. They had to be something different, and I think this is very important. We did not have this entity, and many people don't realize that, before this summer. We just didn't have it. It's a new disease.
I meant what city department
What's
you deal with. I didn't mean which.
The city department is the addiction services agency who has, unfortunately, more at stake in proving that its programs worked than in accepting the fact that there is this problem. And I think that, and I'll be very frank, because I'm both trained in law and medicine, I think that's the problem of having it run by a lawyer. Because lawyers are very convinced that the adversary system is the answer, and winning is very important. Doctors learned from the very beginning that sometimes you will lose. In fact, you will always lose because death will win out. And so you don't think that your ego is hooked up in success. Your ego in medicine is hooked up in correct diagnosis, in honesty, and in confronting the problem. That's totally different with lawyers. And unfortunately, both the Narcotics Addiction Control Commission and the Addiction Services Agency is run by lawyers who are deeply committed to winning for their programs. And that has nothing to do with medicine. The fact is that if they had come forward and said, as I think they should have, to all the citizenry, look, we have an epidemic, just like we had the flu, the Hong Kong flu, the influenza of 1922. How can we all pull together? How can we all work together? Certainly, in no stretch of anyone's imagination does Odyssey House think that it can treat 25 or 45,000 children. What are we going to do? How are we going to treat them? How are we going to handle every single public school? How are we going to handle what's going on across the nation? It's a problem in which all responsible citizenry have to work together. It's more work and more to do than anybody can handle. And yet their entire, both the NACC and they have $208 million they've had in 4 years, the NACC. They have $54 million this year and $85 next year, with nothing for adolescent addiction in this budget. In the $85 million budget, after we yelled and screamed, and we were up there on Monday, they've appropriated $1.2 million out of 85 for children. Now, I, as a high-paying, tax-paying mother, resent that out of 85 million, 1.2 million goes, and about 20 million goes to propaganda. I would much prefer that 1 million went to propaganda and 20 million went to treating our children. I mean, there's just absolutely, I don't know how, I think it's actually, there are two issues here that I learned a lot about when I was first summoned to court for violating, and the law I violated is a very interesting one. We have something called certificates of occupancy. And there's no question that the Bronx House is a disgrace, and we would love to have you, visit this. We say it's a disgrace. In fact, we opened 87th Street over here in a very interesting way. We had Judy Levine, the house mother in the Bronx, called me up on the night that was 5 degrees. She had 20 children sleeping on the basement floor, and 8 of them didn't have mattresses yet. And she asked me if she could move the 8 without mattresses, because it was really pretty cold, into the boiler room. And of course, I was afraid of the monoxide. And the next day, I accepted Mr. Maidman's offer to take buildings, because it had gotten to the point where, as I've been saying, and some of you may have read, I didn't say he was an angel. What I said was, would we have jailed the innkeeper for letting Mary deliver in a manger because it's against the rules with animals? There should be no animals in maternity ward. And that's what I really said, is that we have no choices sometimes. There is the choice that I had was between allowing these children to remain on the street and dying, and accepting whatever the reasons were, more space and more warm space. So that we moved these children, and I will say that one of them, Sharon Lipschutz, came in, she's 14, and she reached down and she touched the floor and she said, "Thank God tonight I can sleep on a warm floor." I think there's something really wrong when a child is suffering from a potentially fatal disease, but in this city, she has to thank God that she can now sleep on a warm floor. As far as these children go, we admitted 62 children last month alone. This is with no court connections, no outreach, no desire to ask for more children. We only take those children that come to us, and every day when they come 6 to 8, it's 6 to 8 more mouths to feed out of a very, privately fundraised budget, so that it's very difficult. Every time I see them, in some ways I'm pleased, but in other ways I say, oh my God, here, I've got more of them. We admitted 62 last month. 5 left, and of the 5 that left, 3 returned. So of the entire 62, only 2 did not wish to continue treatment. I can only tell you we have 1 staff member for every 10 children. There has been no acting out, there has been no aggression, there has been no violence, there's been no sexual problems. They are, I think, better than my own children, and I hate to tell you that. I mean, they're just good. They are very anxious to get well, and many of them, for the first time, are in an environment which allows them some responsibility, some freedom, and is not really a jungle or vicious. Or to some of them has some emotional content where many of them felt very isolated and deprived. Interestingly enough, a large percentage, just because we're here, a large percentage of our children are Jewish, for whatever that reason may be. It may be a slightly askew statistic in the sense that Jewish parents do bring their children for treatment first. They are in very many ways, and so we have been seeing children now being brought down from Scarsdale, being brought from Florida, being brought from Riverdale, coming from Forest Hills. These parents are very concerned. They pick it up very quickly, and they do bring their children to the only center that will take them. And so that is a fact. Yeah.
Pardon me, but when these parents do bring their children in, do they contribute any funds towards their children's stay with you?
Some of them do. This is a very important point of Odyssey. If they do, their children do not know, and we do not know. In other words, it goes through a totally separate department, so that in no way does it affect how we treat the child or how we relate to that child. Particularly we have psychiatrist children, we have doctors' children. I'm sure that many of them do send monies in, but it cannot be in relationship because we have some children that have lived on rooftops for 3 and 4 years. For instance, Joey Betancourt, a lot of you may have seen his pictures, a very pretty, tiny 14-year-old. Both parents are addicts, and he's been on the rooftops for 2 years. He came in from the Department of Welfare.
Is this true of the majority of the youngsters that are?
No, the majority of youngsters have at least one parent. And many of the parents do volunteer their time in community organizing and in selling buttons and in doing things like that. But we, at no time, even in our parents' groups, allow anybody to talk if they do donate, because it would make too much of a problem. It would make too much of an inequality.
How do you get it financed?
By people like you. We may pass our buttons among you. We probably will sell buttons. We sell buttons on the street. We beg, borrow, and do everything else. We have our total expenditure now is about $600 a day. A lot of money. But you see, the realities are. Let me give you a story. It's a marvelous story of our society. We have 7,200 cases of sodas with cyclamates. When cyclamates went off the market, we had the, again, existential choice of value judgment of cyclamates or starvation. We took the cyclamates and the companies took their donation. Our children are good enough for cyclamates. They're not good enough for funding, they're not good enough for anything else. You can't get in the gymnasium of one of our buildings because of the amount of cyclamates. But it still is better than no food. And this is the realities of where we live.
What is your approach in treatment for these kids?
Well, our approach is markedly modified by the fact we have no money, which is real. What our ideal approach would be very similar to what we have in the adults. And let me just associate and I'll go on a little more on that. For instance, we are fully accredited and recognized. That's not the problem. And we do receive $319,000 for 60 adults. Now, each of the adults, when they come in, such as Gilmore or Anita, get a number. And they get a little number which is recorded in Albany. And I get $2.25 to feed Anita every day, and I get $2.20. Well, Anita's now in Jersey, but when she was originally in treatment in New York, and I get $2.25 to feed Gilmore. At Christmas time, we got a donation of 50 turkeys for the kids. And I thought it would be nice if I could buy 50 pounds of yams and trade a few yams for some of the turkeys. When I buy yams with Gilmore's numbered money, Gilmore must eat it. I can't trade. It's called embezzlement. I cannot take what should be stamped NACC number so-and-so turkey and switch it with yams. And so everything that comes in, bought with the monies that I'm given for Gilmore, must be for Gilmore. The urine cup for his daily urine analysis has a number, has a name, and says property of the NACC, and I cannot use it for the children. I mean, this is the kind of unbelievable nonsense for which they pay people to watch that we don't do things so terrible as embezzling a turkey leg to feed a child. I mean, that kind of embezzlement I could easily live with. I would have no problems with that. The major method of therapy is that kind of therapy, and that's the Rewire Free Association. We are very reality-based. We take the children. For instance, I remember a very dramatic, when I was still in traditional Freudian training, and was busy cathecting out past traumatic experiences and doing all that kind of thing. We were having a long session, and one boy described how he used to be tied to the radiator for 8 hours a day with a glass of water on his chest. And if he moved and that water spilled, he would be chained for a few more hours. That didn't bother him so much because he accepted the fact that his father was a little off. What bothered him was the day that the welfare worker visited. And this was a man now. He was about 31. He was telling the story. He was about 13 at the time, and he was chained again. And the welfare worker visited, and his mother, who he did not consider psychotic, didn't tell the welfare worker and ask for help. And she just let him remain there. And that was what he was talking about, how upset he was at the fact that his mother, who was not crazy, had not reached out and, in a sense, helped him. He could understand it. And I realized at that time that there are many life experiences you cannot cathect out. Those of us who have been fortunate enough to only have most of our traumas emotional don't realize the extent of what many, many people have to go through. And I think that Freud and traditional psychiatry was based very much on the Middle European Jewish culture, which was very polished and very compulsive and very formal of 1890. We don't have that. We have a totally different world for many of these kids. What you've got to, and grown-ups, what you've got to do is bring them in and say to them, look, we accept the fact that for 10, 12, 13 years, all kinds of injustices have occurred. All kinds of things. In fact, you may still, if you're black, be subject to many, many traumas throughout life. Life is not equal. Life is not fair. But the thing is, are you going to hurt yourself even further and make it worse? Or are you going to sit down and say, look, I've got this, this, and this strength, and I'm going to build on it? So that really the major part of the Odyssey method is a continual challenge in graduated steps to the positive health of the individual, rather than focusing on the pathology, which is in more traditional one-to-one analysis. When they say that psychiatry did not work with this particular patient group, it was not that psychiatry didn't work. It was that we tried to treat different diseases with old methods. In other words, it would have been as if we said that we had no cure for heart disease if we had tried to use kidney medicines. We tried to treat traditional neurotic symptoms, and the disease we were facing was anger, rebellion, acting out, and self-destruction.
Well, now, since this is a peer disease, if I may use this expression, is the bulk of our young people angry? Does this account for the fact that among all strata of society we have this?
Yes, now we have what we saw in the traditional addict, which was anger and character, what we call the majority of our patients, not all, but I would say about 60% of them are character disorders. And character disorder means that they take, rather than displacing their pathology into another kind of symptom like compulsive obsession or hand washing or dreaming, they do it in action. And a great deal of their action is self-destructive because of the anger. What we are now seeing is that our young people are justifiably angry and cynical. A very good example would be that I remember at 13 and 14 that I believed that the Second World War was fought for all God-given values, and that our country was out like a knight on a white horse. And I had no problems believing in our just cause. And this was very important to me, to believe our nation was just, our nation was right, that there were values by which we lived. Whether we agree with the Vietnam War or not, we must accept the fact that it's a hard war to justify on the same kind of value judgments, and many of our young people are having a very hard time even believing we are right. This is tremendously emotionally damaging, because if you don't believe in your role models, if you don't respect your role models, I can tell you that I've had more trauma since August than I thought I could stand, and I'm pretty strong ego-wise, and I'm well in my 30s, watching politics. I have never. When I started this, and I'll be very frank, I thought that the lives of American children were above politics. I thought that that was a value that we'd have no difficulty accepting. I can't tell you, they don't give a goddamn. And I can't say it any other way. The first question, if you ask a politician, is who else is sponsoring? Who else is there? Which side of the House is it on? Which side of the Senate is on? And what has this got to do with kids dying now at a rate of 1 a day? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And yet you've got to, and this is seen, you've got to realize in Hunts Point, people are living without coal, without any heat. For instance, one teacher just brought in that he can't teach in his class because 90% of the kids come to school frozen. They have to be thawed out. And this is true. They have to be thawed out. After they're thawed out, they've got such respiratory distress that they can't even hear, and all he can do, that was the guy that was yelling with Father G again, it sounds like he's making it up. But if you go and you walk through those streets, you know he's not making it up. When we took over, and I didn't know it either, and it's not the landlord's fault. Let me say that very strongly, which is something that we feel very at Odyssey. I took a walk with Charlie Goodell in the summer. And I came upon these 2 unbelievable buildings in which there were rats, in which there were 9 children living in 6 inches of water, in which I can't even describe the odors, the stench of the building. In fact, one person had been cooking in the building, and as she was cooking, she watched her pipes go up because the addicts steal the pipes to sell it for the brass money. And as she was cooking, her gas pipes and water pipes and everything else went. They were just the slops go out the window because there's no toilets. One child fell off of a 4th floor window ledge and wasn't hurt because he fell into 4 feet of garbage. We were cleaning out the backyards. We took over these buildings. We were cleaning out the backyards, and we had to stop because they were still throwing the slops on us. I mean, you cannot imagine. I mean, it's just a totally different world. In fact, one of our workers from Harlem said that Harlem is a suburb. Harlem is a suburb in comparison to the Hunts Point area. That was the immediate, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, people will be having sexual relations on the stoops. I mean, it is and this is of the population. When we first did it, we were going to do something called Treat the Streets. We were going to compare 4 blocks. I didn't know that on one block, in which 9 of the buildings, these are all small tenements, in which 9 of the buildings were uninhabited, 3,000 people lived in the others. I mean, and of those 3,000 people, 60% are children. So that when we're talking about what's going on, this is a little different than but it's all interconnected. These children see nothing but this, day in and day out. We tried, actually, we finally had to, I took this walk with Charlie Goodell and the press and everything else, and I blasted the landlord. You know, I got to and I said, how could anybody make people live like this? You know, and I was out on my white horse. I just was inexperienced. That's all there was to it. I just didn't know what the hell I was talking about. And I got called up, and it turns out that the landlord was one of the founders of Yeshiva University. Couldn't have been more charming, he'll remain nameless. And he said to me, I'm going to teach you a lesson. He said, I'm giving you the buildings. And I'm giving you a couple of $1,000 with each building. He says, I'm going to give you the money. He says, are you taking? So I said, fine. And I took the buildings, and I became a landlord. As soon as did Odyssey House become a landlord, then the local agencies started protests against us. You know, great, for we're not giving this service, we're not giving that service. You put in a boiler, they take out the boiler the next day. I mean, you can't imagine. You clean up the yards and they throw the slops on you. I mean, you've got to understand that there's a great deal more than just saying that it's a terrible landlord, or it's a terrible this, or it's a terrible that. It's the whole attitudes and systems and behavior and ways that has to really be worked with. At which point, we just couldn't. We then, in one of our houses, we were going to move in resident house managers. They were going to live there, so that their destiny and the destiny of the tenants would be together, and they would pool the rents, and everything that was collected would go right back in the house, and they'd have a tenant representative, and they'd this and that. First of all, we couldn't get them to come to meetings. Second of all, they were told that they didn't have to pay rent under any circumstances. And I said, if you don't pay rent, how are we going to fix the boiler? How are we going to pay for the fuel? You can collect the rent, you can bank the rent, you can have someone watch, and every cent that's collected will go back in the buildings. There'll be separate accounts, and you, in a sense, will have charge of your own destiny. No rents, no nothing, not going to do anything, not even going to collect the garbage. And we're busy collecting the garbage and cleaning up. And we clean up several of the apartments, and we're going to move in 6 residents. We're going to move into this building. We can't move them in. Why can't we move them in? Because in the basement is one of the major dealers of the block. And I can't move in ex-addict residents with a drug pusher. So we go to the police, we go to the State Narcotics Addiction Commission, and in fact, our administrator is an ex-addict, takes out a petition to have this guy arrested. Here's one ex-addict rehabilitated to the extent that he's turning another one in to get this. Nobody will hear us. Nobody will do anything. We finally went down there. We have a meeting with this guy. The glassine envelopes are all over. He's stoned out of his mind. His wife's stoned out of his mind. And one of our residents gets very angry and he starts yelling at him in Spanish. And he's yelling back at him in Spanish and he punches our resident in the eye. So we call the police. The police come and they pat the dealer on the back and they said to him, now behave yourself, Louis, and stop this, and out they walked. Never in my life would I have believed it. There was no, I called Burton Roberts. I mean, all this nonsense I read in the papers, I don't have any problem with anymore. There was no way we could get this guy out of the building. We can't move in as long as this guy is here. We got him out of the building. I'll tell you exactly how we got him out of the building. And this will explain to you a lot of the things you're going to be reading in Brooklyn about other groups. We went down, we told, some of the boys went down, they told him to break his legs. Exactly what they said. They said, you get out, we'll break your legs. They turned off his water, they turned off his lights, and they said, you get out. Now, if that is, and that's after trying to go to the police, that's after trying to go to the commission, that was the only way we could get him out. So he moved from our building to somebody else. Then we had these 9 kids living with all these pipes and this mess in a building that was impossible. We couldn't get the mother to move. With her princess phone, her TV dinners, and her water to here with the babies playing in it.
Where were you going to move her?
We were going to move her wherever she found. We were going to move her.
Wherever she found.
Yeah, we had an apartment. She found an apartment. She wouldn't move. She wouldn't move because if she stayed a long enough time, she might get 200 or 300 relocation money. You can't. You have to understand. The babies were in this mess. We were going to move her with the trucks. We were going to do everything else. Finally, we came in one day, and Al Johnson, her name was also Johnson. Al turned in. He said, "Look," he said, "I'm moving your kids." He said, "I can't stand it anymore." He says, "You stay here." He says, "I'm moving your kids." He says, "I can't watch their living like this anymore." There's a twofold thing that has to be done, and what has to be done is that first of all, people have to have a commitment, just like you asked what helps in Odyssey. The addict gets a commitment to helping his own destiny. You have to get people with the attitude that they, in part, can be masters of their own destiny. And it may mean confrontation politics. It may mean a great many things, but it also means that the system will have to give, because the system is terrible. The system doesn't care. The system is really involved in not allowing people to grow. And that's a real sad thing. Yeah.
I was just thinking, you mentioned in the beginning that this is a problem which cuts across all social classes. And I think we're not well educated, but at least we're better educated in the problems of narcotics in Harlem. Even though we obviously haven't really learned about that. But I think we're not at all well educated about the problem with the middle and upper middle class, the problem in Scarsdale, the problem in Zone 108, the problem in Queens that we have.
Well, I think that's problem. You see, narcotics is only a reflection, let us say, a mandrake cry at a final, cynical, defeated human being, whether it be middle class or it be upper class or it be lower class. It's easy for us to understand why people in ghettos would feel that their destinies have no way out. What we have not understood again and again is that we have lost the respect of our adolescents. And therefore, adolescents must have adult role models they respect to grow in healthy direction. It's very hard for them to respect us. It's very hard for us to respect each other. It's very hard when I hear the cynicism that I'm hearing from reporters, the cynicism I'm hearing from responsible legislators. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a magnificent example of the kind of cynicism which is very real. A very high-placed Washington aide of a very high-placed representative of the people was up here visiting Odyssey early in the children's program. And I said to him, this was right before St. Luke's, I said to him, you know, that they're not going to take much more of it. And that certain agencies, such as NAT is coming, are arming. And they're arming because their children are dying. So he said, good. I said, good? He said, good. He says, when they shoot, he says, there are 40 million of them and 180 of us.
I'm sorry.
There are 40 million blacks, well now, and 180 of us, and that's a little roll of tanks out. That's a high-placed aide of a high-placed representative of our state, and there was no humor. That kind of cynicism, that kind of attitude towards problem solving, that kind of thing which is going on is very hard for our young people to understand. Our young people have difficulty understanding many of our racial discrimination ideas. Our young people have a hard time understanding a lot of our values. Some of our values are good. In fact, I think most of our values as individuals in our family units are excellent. The realities are that when we've gotten into larger urban groups, the problems became so difficult that we just didn't fight for what we believed in. And so we just kept our homes safe, and we didn't insist that our cities be safe. Because I truly believe, and maybe I'm still naive, and maybe it'll take me a few more months, I truly believe that the average person, the average mother, the average family unit is a responsible one. And that we protect ourselves from what is going on in the large city groups by not knowing, by being unaware, or by just saying, well, I'll keep my unit safe. And because I just, most of the people I know I like. And so I can't believe that it is that government reflects really reflects its people anymore. I think the average constituent, the average voter is a decent human being. And the problems are, you asked me about affluent society. I'll give you the example of Farley Dickinson and the example of Larry Rockefeller. Both of them were in trouble. Larry Rockefeller got involved with black communities at 18. When he began working in the ghettos, working and seeing things and beginning to feel a value as a human being, he gave up his difficulty. He was doing very well. Farley Dickinson went to Columbia, was involved in nothing, and of course died of opium eating. You see, the difficulty is that we've got to, in a sense, get our children involved in things of meaning, involved in personal service. We've got to get away from being computerized numbers. We've got to get into interpersonal relationships in which there is concern, in which there is values, and in which there is integrity. Man needs integrity, and our kids are saying, what has happened to our integrity? Yeah.
Can I get a little more specific? Many of us here have children who are teens, preteens. We are very concerned for them. Can you give us some positive suggestions, A, and things that we can do for them to support them against the pressure of their peers, and B, how we can be aware when the peer pressure has influenced them beyond our ability?
No, I'm going to answer it the most difficult way. The only way I know to protect my 11-year-old is to be the kind of person that I like myself. It may sound very funny. The kind of person that I hope my children will respect and be involved in those things which are of value. The only way we can protect our children is to get them goal-directed. To sit down and say to a child, what do you want out of life? What kind of a person do you want to become? And will drugs interfere with that? Reality-based, saying that what is the purpose of adolescence? What is the purpose of human life? Where do you want to go? And looking at life very much as a fight between the self-constructive and the self-destructive urges of the yin and yang within each of us. Say to the child, does the taking of drugs help you? Does it in any way get you where you want to go? Or will it make it more difficult? In turn, I also think that one of the ways that we're going to have to turn this around is by using large groups of children, like the Odyssey children, who have become 4-Hers or converts to drug-free society. These children are like a convert to any religion. They are zealous. They are constantly talking about the fact that drugs almost killed them, that drugs is an illness. There is no negative charisma attached to drug taking at Odyssey House. Drug taking at Odyssey House is like tuberculosis. They talk about it like tuberculosis. And they say to kids from schools and from work projects that get involved, would you go out and catch cancer? Would you go out and catch tuberculosis? Would you go out and take a life-threatening disease? Or would you do other things? I am teaching a course in Chapin which is a drug addiction education course. It's called Moral Wisdom for the Affluent. It's not called drug addiction. Moral Wisdom for the Affluent. And that's where it's at. Because we cannot protect our children unless we have morals, unless we have moral wisdom, and unless we get them involved in things of value. And that will take care of itself.
Do you have children or young adults available to go to any of the schools now?
No, we'd rather the children come to us. And that's the same thing. We have a center here at 87. We run adolescent groups on Saturdays. We don't talk about drugs. We talk about what are they doing in the ghettos. What are they doing for other children who are afflicted? Are they selling buttons? Are they getting involved? Let me say to you that if a child goes out and sells an Odyssey one-meal button, and we say to that child, now you know you're allowed to help your brother or sister, and children are very nice. You're allowed to help your brother or sister over here who is really sick, who's sleeping on a floor, who's living 12 and 13 in a room because they want to get well, who has had everybody else die. You can sell us buttons, but you have to give us one commitment, and that commitment is you don't use drugs. Because if you use drugs, say you're out there and everybody knows you're working with Odyssey and you get arrested or you get in trouble, what will you do? This little girl over here will go to jail for 10 years. This fellow over here will go to jail for 15 years. Is your smoking a marijuana cigarette, or is your taking a pill, or is your using heroin important enough to you that you will place your brother and sister in danger of going to jail, in danger of losing the whole program? If you want to use drugs, you go out and use drugs and don't help us. We haven't had any child turn it away. Because when confronted with that kind of choice, children make the right choices. Children, we've had some of the most rebellious characters from collegiate come down and turn around and go back. Because they're now seeing it not as an attractive peer thing to do, but something which is damaging to another human being.
Don't you feel that the conflicting attitudes towards the danger of marijuana contributes a lot to this frequency with which marijuana is used?
Well, I think the conflicting attitudes towards marijuana reflect our entire hypocritical system. Right. There is no question to any of us that marijuana is less toxic than alcohol, right? I mean, let's be very frank. Marijuana is less toxic than alcohol. One of the worst body poisons is alcohol. Alcohol is damaging to the liver. Alcohol is damaging to the brain. Alcohol is damaging to the peripheral nerves. Alcohol is terrible, all right? We decided in 1930, whatever it was, that rather than have a total disregard of the law, we would weigh the value of respect for the law versus the number of people who would become alcoholics, the emotional strain and the victims of the families of alcoholics. And when people talk about drugs as crimes without victims, I don't know what they're talking about. Because I have never seen an addict whose families are not victimized, whose children are not victimized, whose loved ones are not victimized. And I've never seen an alcoholic who doesn't go right through and hurt everybody else in his family. So there are plenty of victims with alcoholism. We decided in 1930 to weigh values. We weighed the value of respect for the law versus more alcoholics, more families victims, more vehicular homicides, a great deal of medical expense in chronic hospitals. We weighed that and we came out in favor of legalizing, right? It's the same thing with marijuana. If we decide that we want to have more vehicular homicides, we want to have more potheads, we want to have more people copping out in exchange for respect for the law, then we will make that as a social decision, and that should be done in the same way as prohibition. It really has nothing to do with medicine. It's nothing to do with the nonsense they're going through. It has to do with whether society wants the burden of additional people in difficulty in exchange for respect for the law. If 12 or 20 million people demand that they smoke marijuana and 12 or 20 million people are going to break the law, then we have to decide whether or not we should change the law. That's really where it's at. It's the same kind of thing. It's worse to have a law that we don't enforce on the books. For instance, in 46 of our states, fornication is against the law. I mean, let's look at it. You know, nobody's paying any attention to what's going on. That's even worse. If we enforced the fornication law, we would be in a great deal of trouble. We are enforcing the marijuana law. However, when we talk about marijuana, we must not over-personalize, and that's another thing that's very difficult. When I say that marijuana is not a dangerous substance any more than alcohol, I am talking about the well-adjusted, mature bank president who comes home and has his scotch before dinner, or who comes home and has his cigarette. I am not talking about the borderline person with great emotional problems. Who would get in trouble with alcohol? The same person who will get in trouble with alcohol will get in trouble with marijuana. I am also not talking about the adolescent. I would not expect my 13 and 14-year-old to be boozing it up every night. I would think that is very serious. In addition, adolescence is probably one of the most, if not the most, difficult time of life. Adolescents are forced to leave the nest, just like little fledglings. Adolescents are forced to find their own values. They're going to answer very important life-threatening questions, such as where am I going, what am I going to become, who am I going to marry, how am I going to be independent. It's a terrifying period of life. At this time, they need all the reality testing. Adolescents are totally idealistic. They go to extremes. They don't smoke one cigarette. They don't use one drug. They don't set reasonable limits. They go gung-ho for causes. To talk about legalizing marijuana for a 14 or 15-year-old, I don't see any sense to it. At this age group, it has great many problems, and any mind distorting or reality testing distorting substance is wrong. Alcohol is wrong. So when we talk about legalizing it, we're talking about legalizing it for a totally different population. And we have to look at it that way. We've got to break it down to population. We've got to break it down to a lot of other things. Let me give you another thing, which is the kind of nonsense we talk about. If I had a choice, I'm being recorded, and I certainly would do neither, but if I had a choice between heroin and barbiturate addiction, I would prefer heroin addiction. And this is a very, very important thing. If I had a choice between heroin addiction and amphetamine addiction, or habituation, I would prefer heroin. Why? And this is something with the soft and hard drugs, the nonsense we perpetuate. Heroin, though it is a very addictive substance, you can use pure heroin for years upon years upon years. And then when you decide to stop, you will go through withdrawal, but you will still be there. If you use large amounts of barbiturates and you use large amounts of amphetamine, when you decide to stop, there is definitely functional brain damage. And then we have definite difficulty in rehabilitation. So that if you have to go back, and we have seen this again and again and again with our residents, we have an easier time rehabilitating the heroin addict. Because the amphetamine, and when the children say this themselves, when they talk about speed kills, what they mean is that when you're finished, you're left with a schizophrenic-like picture. You are not left with a human being that you seem able to rehabilitate. For instance, barbiturate withdrawal is more dangerous than heroin withdrawal. Barbiturates can cause death during withdrawal. Doridans, which are a hypnotic drug, are much more physically toxic than heroin. And so one of the things that I have heard, particularly from the affluent parts of society, is at least my child isn't on heroin. They're only on barbiturates or amphetamines. The minute they say that to me, I go like this, because this is really difficult. The entire thought processes with amphetamines are very difficult. There is also the fact that heroin, when the person is on heroin, the person on heroin is very quiet, non-involved, and doesn't care. The amphetamines and the barbiturates cause agitation, cause anger, cause aggression, and cause a great deal more difficulty in the entire environment that they are in. As far as LSD goes and the hallucinogens, of course, they seem to cause far-reaching effects that we don't even have full facts on. Glue is a terrible thing, again causing a lot of brain damage. The aerosol cans, which are something very difficult to understand, but present a very interesting pattern. I don't know how many of you read about Perry Durier's report that people are using everything, including the aerosol cans, from foot powder. What this suggests is that there's no way law enforcement will solve the problem. You can't outlaw, first of all, barbiturates and amphetamines. There's too much of the pharmaceutical industry lobby and everything else, and we also need these drugs. You cannot outlaw them. You certainly can't outlaw foot powder. You can't outlaw the aerosol can, which has become the very, I don't know if you understand about the aerosol can. They take like the Ready Whip, and you put it in your mouth when it's empty, and you blow the air, and you get air bubbles in your head. And the air bubbles in your head make you very high. You can get air emboli, but you, by force, through the top or the roof of your mouth, you can force air into the vessels of the brain, and this makes you very high. You can't outlaw these cans. A very dangerous way of getting high. But the thing is, law enforcement won't make it, because you can't outlaw all of industry. You can't outlaw chemicals. You can't, there's just no, it really has to be attitudinal change. And I think this is the most important thing that we have to understand. That we've got to turn around the attitudes, because law enforcement won't get it. That kind of thing won't get it. It really has to be.
Recently, there was a youngster in the newspaper. Recently, there was a youngster in one of the newspapers. You read so much of these things that I don't remember the name or what the situation was. But she said she had been taking so much of these things.
Yeah, that was the Salazar child, the psychiatrist child.
That anything turned her on now. Now, I don't quite understand what she means by anything.
Yeah, well, you see, after you've taken enough drugs long enough, you can even begin to trip on lights. You can begin to trip on other things. We have to understand, what does it mean to be turned on? To be turned on means to leave the reality of today and go into some other reality. If today's reality is meaningful enough, people will not cop out by some other reality. Let me tell you another thing which we are doing, which is tremendously damaging. And some of you have heard, and no one's asked me about methadone. All right? Let me talk a little bit about methadone, which we should. I have treated about 2,000 addicts. I have placed 4 addicts on methadone. I'm not against methadone for that percentage. That's a very small percentage. One of them was 83 years of age. He used to make the opium pots for John Barrymore, and after 62 years of heroin addiction, I really felt that personality reconstruction or new group techniques was just inappropriate, and this man was maintaining himself on a Social Security check and his earnings as a attendant in a men's room. And I really felt that this methadone was appropriate for him. There's another very interesting fact about heroin, which many people don't realize. In the 1900s, heroin was one of the best antipsychotic agents before we had Thorazine. There is a certain type of schizophrenia which is very much helped by the use of heroin. These people are a very small group of the total problem that we have. They are a different group, and they really should be looked at as a different group. They are taking heroin not for kicks or for this, but to function. You can easily tease them out of the rest because their sex life is up, their productivity is up, and everything is better when they are on heroin. That's not true of anybody else. Everybody else, their anxiety is less, their aggression is less. This one group responds to heroin by being able to work, by being able to relate, and this group really needs some kind of maintenance. Our laws are screwy because we're not allowed to write for heroin no matter what. You know, no physician can legally write for heroin. That's incredible, because if it was a proper agent, it should be used if it's a good drug. If it makes a person do better, it should be used. We can't write, so we have been putting them on methadone. Unfortunately, methadone doesn't work as well. In fact, some of them it holds, but it doesn't seem to hold them in the same way. We are not, and let me make that very clear, we are not treating drug addiction with methadone there. We are treating the schizophrenic process. And those of you who have any acquaintanceship with schizophrenia know that anything which can abate that process and to make the person less in distress is merciful. It's a very severe disease, and we should not be prevented from treating them. As far as methadone for the rest, for the character disorder, as far as methadone for the 16 and 17-year-old, as far as methadone for the 12-year-old, I will only comment that it is changing a Scotch drinker to a bourbon drinker. I will only comment to the fact that all that it says about society is that in 1804 we hailed the discovery of morphine as the cure for opium addiction. In 1904 we hailed the advent of heroin as the cure for morphine addiction, and in 1954 we hailed methadone as the cure for heroin addiction. The only difference is we learned more quickly to repeat our mistakes. Rather than doing it in 100 years, we can now do it in 50 years. Soon we'll get down to being able to do it in 25 years. We have illicit methadone use. Let me again say to you that methadone is more addicting than heroin, that withdrawal from methadone is more difficult and more painful, that children born of methadone-addicted mothers will be addicted, and that if I had a 13 or 14-year-old child involved in this, I certainly would not want her a chronic disease, having to take methadone for the rest of her life and bear addicted children. I think that methadone is a reflection of society's cop-out on problem solving and having to have a magic pill. Another thing about what can we do to prevent this from spreading. One of the things we can do is begin to police ourselves and to make other segments of society responsible. One of the most guilty segments of society is the advertising and the entire thing. We must stop that nonsense. An ad such as appeared on our city buses recently when I needed a fix, the only thing that would help was Andrew Geller's shoes, should have really caused a total boycott of Andrew Geller and the agency putting out such nonsense. The kind of ads which says when you're tired, take this pill, when you need pep, take that pill, the Geritol will help you with everything, is really, when we come down to it, a totally irresponsible attitude. And I also think that even plays such as Hair, and I'll give you an example. I went with the chairman of the board and my husband and his wife to see Hair. They thought it was delightful. I became ill and furious. I couldn't even go out for coffee afterwards. And they all said I was acting out, and I said I just was so upset. That play actively pushes drugs from the stage. Why should we, of the older generation, get a voyeuristic exhibitionist charge out of watching that kind of message? I'm not so sure that freedom is the highest value. I also think there's a very close tie between freedom, license, and eventually to our children getting into trouble. Because children do not have the necessary discrimination to be able to eventually know the difference. And some of them can get into trouble and some of them can be dead. You ask another reason. Let me give you another belief that I have very strongly, and then let me let Anita and Gilmore comment for a minute and then get back to questions. One of the things we are paying for is Spock. And for Spock. I have no doubts about it. And I am very strong in that, and some of you may be shocked. A rigid, over-disciplined parent who is even cruel is better than a permissive parent. Because the function and role of a parent is to be a backboard against which a child can find their own identity. If you don't have your own identity, if you don't have the ability to say yes and no, if you don't have the ability to discipline your own lives, they are totally lost. If you have one idea and your husband has another or your wife has another, the child is lost. The child needs something against which it can either identify or it can rebel. If it has neither identification or rebellion, it is lost, and that's what we're paying for. We've got to have values. It is better to have a wrong value than no value. You have a wrong value, the kid can go, eh. I mean, I can tell you that probably I am in large part a very good concretization of rebellion against much of my mother's values. But at least she has values. She really has values. I still have to stand up when she enters the room. I mean, it's that kind of rigidity. But there was never a question, as far as I was concerned, that I knew where she stood. I mean, she had an answer for everything. And then I either accepted that answer or I didn't. But she had an answer. And that is tremendously important. That gives a child a sense of security. That gives a child a sense of a reality against which it can find itself. And do not, and I can only do not be pals to your children. They don't need pals. They have plenty of other pals.
All on pot.
Unfortunately. But you can turn it around. Let me give you the answer to the pot, right? Which we did at Michigan State. We got to Michigan State and we discovered that out of the 40,000 students, 20,000 were using drugs, mostly pot, but 5,000 were using serious drugs. This was 2 years ago, for whatever reason. And I sat down with the kids And I said, I'm not going to tell you not to use pot. I said, that's not what I'm going to tell you. I said, what I'm going to tell you is that I don't respect you unless you use it in one way. There's only one way to use pot. I said, you're yelling and screaming about the hypocritical, no-valued older generation. I said, what are you doing when you're hiding in closets, clandestine, in a dirty kind of way, cheating on the system? I said, if you believe so strongly in marijuana, you get a petition up and all of you go down to the governor's home and you all sit on this lawn and you all smoke. I said, and then you all get arrested and you all try to change the law. I said, if you go and hide, I can't respect you because what you're doing is cheating on one way or another. If you believe in something, you stand up for what you believe in. And you know that it cut down a great deal. A lot of them cut down. A lot of them are lobbying. A lot of them want the law changed. A lot of them are working. But a lot of them could see the sense of the fact that you have to stand up and be counted. That what the pot is really a kind of very infantile protest, which doesn't fit now with their whole idealistic attitudes. And I think the worst thing a parent can do is if a parent should say to a child, you get arrested, you'll pay the price. I won't help you. Because one of the things you learn is how you change the law. You change the law in one of two ways. Either by lobbying for change and writing, or putting yourself on the point. And if you want to put yourself on the point, I may go and say that I think the law should be changed, but if you break the law, you should be willing to pay the penalty. Anarchy is not where it's at. Anarchy is wrong. Just like the father who was down in City Hall in Garlick's statement yesterday, which got me so uptight, about we can't let everyone break the law. No, we can't let everyone break the law. We can let people break the law who are willing to pay the penalty. That's the group we can let break the law. As I sit here, having just broken the law, I can say very clearly, we had a very famous case in England called Rex v. Bourne, in which Dr. Bourne was head of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. He was presented with a 12-year-old girl pregnant after a gangbang rape by 12 American soldiers, right? At that time, this was in 1945, he had the choice of what was he going to do with his child. In America, we would allow that child to have a baby. I've seen that. Right? I've seen that again and again. He didn't do that. He decided to do the therapeutic abortion. He did the abortion, he put down the curette, and he called the police. And he had the law changed in England. That kind of man I respect. In fact, I respect him more than I respected Guttmacher, who yelled and screamed about the thalidomide baby but wouldn't do it. You see, to me, if you're confronted with a choice, and a choice which has a time limit on it, not a choice that can wait for years upon years for solution, but a choice like these children in which you are faced with the possibility of death, you've got to put yourself on the point at some time. The law that I'm accused of breaking, which is an interesting one, is that we have a certificate of occupancy to run a convent, and I am running a rehabilitation center. Not overcrowded. I am using the building for a different use. I asked to change the use, but I can't change, I don't have the necessary requirements. And so I face, of course, 6 months in jail and $1,500 fine for changing the use from 9 nuns to 50 children. And that's the kind of system. Maybe, Anita, you want to tell a little bit about yourself?
Well, I don't think really talking about myself at this point in any great detail would serve any purpose other than to mention I'm 20 years old. I came from a middle-class Jewish family, one of 4 daughters, and I was addicted to heroin for 3 years. Other than that, I don't think there's anything important to mention about myself. And to add to what Judy said, there's not much I could add except that the problem has gotten so out of hand to such a degree where what I used to call this society the so-called responsible leaders of our community, when I refer to them as being cynical and hypocritical, I can't even give them that much credit. It's it's insane really when you and the problem can't be denied anymore. That's the thing. Months ago they were just denying that it existed and said, well, maybe in 2 years from now we'll be able to sit down and discuss the issue and maybe we'll have some funding for adolescents. But there's no denying it anymore. It's in the papers every day. Everybody knows about it. It's everybody's kid. If it's not your child, it's your next door neighbor. And there's just no denying, and there's just nothing done. And it breaks my heart. I have 2 younger sisters. My 18-year-old sister is already involved with drugs. My 14-year-old sister, I'm terribly afraid for her. I'm afraid for my own kids.
And Gilmore can speak even more about that.
I come from Brooklyn, going back years ago. I come from a family, my mother's Austrian Jew, my father's Filipino. When Judy mentioned about the rigidness, I was heavily disciplined when I was a child, and I grew up with a lot of discipline from my mother. The word no was not allowed in the family. If I used the word no, I got slapped down. I started using heroin when I was 25, 26. I started using pot when I was 15. The discipline I received somehow seemed to work in my favor, because the 10 years I used heroin, I functioned. I self-disciplined myself. I was able to use heroin and work. I had a good job. I had worked through a lot of adolescent problems. I had finished school. I had different ways of making money legally. I was a musician and a photo engraver. And all the years that I used heroin, I had a wife and a child. And where I even worked, they didn't even know I used heroin. And my neighbors did not know I used heroin. And I think it had a lot to do with the discipline I received when as I was raised. I was able then to self-discipline myself, to be able to work and function on heroin. And all the years I did spend in the street using heroin, I have a daughter that's 13 years old. When I was out on the street, and I came into the program in '68, I didn't see 12, 11, 13-year-old kids using heroin. If I saw them in the street, even the dealers then in the street that were 18 or 21 years old, they wouldn't sell to kids. This was destructive. And since being in the program, I noticed about 8 months ago, we basically were dealing with adults like myself. And the type of resident was coming in was 17, 16, working in a storefront in Harlem. A 9-year-old boy came in and he was hooked. And we could not accept. We could not accept under 17 years old. The law says we couldn't accept these kids. We had to turn them away, send them back into the street. And this happened about 6 to 8 months. I was not aware of the problem because I had been in the program. That 12, 11, 13-year-olds were using. Why are they using? When I was in the street, it was 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds were using drugs. And what's happening today, as Judy said, the kids today do not have any role models. So if you take yourself back, when you were 15, you looked up to the 18-year-old. The 15-year-old kids are using the 18-year-olds as role models, and they're using drugs. The kids today look at the Beatles, who have known to use drugs. It's being advertised, as Judy says, live with Viv. And I go to parent-teachers meetings, and they ask me, where do kids get drugs? And that's a funny question because drugs are in everybody's apartment. You just go into the medicine cabinet and you take a Tuinal or a Seconal. Doctors give out, there's barbiturates in every home. The kids know about it. The kids are a lot more intelligent today than what they were years ago somehow. Drugs, as we started 6 months ago as being an epidemic amongst teenagers, was denied. They said, no, it's not happening. Now everybody's aware of the problem. 10 years that I lived with my wife and my daughter, I was not a responsible parent. In a sense, I didn't show any responsible concern. Not until a few months ago, I started being responsible by taking some interest in my daughter and found out her behavior was very strange. She was not relating to her mother. She was not trusting her mother. She was not talking about her problems. I found out she was lying, and I was getting feedback from different people. I was in the program. It's difficult for me to spend a lot of time, but it was no excuse. I took every minute I could aside, and I started devoting it to my daughter. I'm on duty in different houses that we have, and I started bringing my daughter and spending the night with me. And she was sitting in groups in the ATU with the teenagers, and she sort of like fit right in, and she got a good feeling. I found out a month later, she came to me and said, Dad, I've been experimenting with heroin. She's used barbiturates and she used pot. She says, I want to come into the program.
She's 13.
She's 13 years
Why
old.
would you want to experiment with heroin? What is the reason behind of these youngsters taking heroin? You say teenagers, anti-establishment.
Well, what did she say? What did she say to you about the heroin?
It's funny, I asked her
The issue, see, the father whose whole life was, messed up. I mean,
She
if
has-
anybody knew that it was wrong.
As far as education and my daughter knowing about heroin, she had a father who used heroin for 10 years. She has an uncle, an aunt, and cousins that use heroin that have been strung out of junkies. As far as being educated, knowing what's going on, she had been connected with the program a long time, Leslie. She had visited quite a few times. And when I asked her, Leslie, why do you want to come into the program? She said she experimented. She snorted, sniffed heroin 4 times, took some barbiturates and smoked pot. I asked her, why do you want to come in the program? Her reply was, the people there are real. I have friends there that are responsible to one another. In other words, they help one another in a responsible way. The kids I have in the street, my friends in the street, are very destructive.
All the kids are using in the school.
All the kids are using. All my friends use heroin. It's just so easy to get. She says, Mommy works. You're in the program. I have to have friends. And she says, my only friends, everybody uses heroin. And she goes to a Catholic school.
What made you decide to go into the program after you told us you functioned on heroin for 10 years and you functioned well?
In '68, well, I finally, after 18 years, 19 years of using drugs, my luck ran out and I got arrested twice. My wife finally became responsible and just got tired of living with a drug addict and locked the door and wouldn't let me in. I had nowhere to go. I was back in the street. I found myself going to my mother at 34 years old. I wasn't feeling too good about myself. I wanted to just stop living, the type of life I was living. So I came to Odyssey House. And since being in Odyssey House, what I did get from Odyssey House, it's very hard to put into words. I was able to get close to people. I was able to talk about things that I would never talk about before, which I never talked about with my wife. I never talked about with my daughter. That's why there was such a separation between us. This is when I started to feel good about myself. I had to kick cold turkey. I thought I could never do that. That was impossible. I would not kick cold turkey. It's too hard to do. And I found out it wasn't that hard. I did it. It was hard. And I found out later on that as I stood in the program, things got harder and harder and harder. And I found out in order for me to get myself together was I had to learn to do the hard things. The easy things were not get. I had life too easy. It was much too easy. Only when I was a child was it rough. My mother was very rigid and very steady. And because of that, I think that had a lot to do with me being able to function as a heroin addict. Majority of the heroin addicts cannot function. And until my wife finally threw me out, then I found I lost my job. I took on another job. Then I started to steal. I kept slipping and slipping and slipping. I was cheating. I continued to cheat. And that's what brought me into Odyssey. I was tired of living.
With a rigid mother, what made you stop then? I mean, she says that your parents should be rigid. It would help give you values and security. Then what made you stop?
I smoked pot for 10 years and used cocaine. At 26, why I used heroin? Stupid.
Well, also you had some, just from a point of view of identity or difficulty, Gilmore's background is an unusual one, with a Jewish mother and a Filipino father. Fitting in was, in a sense, difficult. There were many, you see, these are many of the things that people need to belong, people need to fit in, people need to feel part of the society in which there are others like them. Being different is very difficult.
There's a question in the back.
I just wanted to know, Dr. Gerber, if there's anything that you would suggest that we can do to help your program, or anything else, a positive action that we as parents can take, or just citizens.
Well, there's a lot of positive action. First of all, we have a center which is open from 9 in the morning till 9 at night at 430 East 87th. That's very close and it's very convenient. We would like you to visit. The realities of visiting it says it more than any other way. There's no...
I would just like to say that I was up to 955 Bruckner Boulevard the other day, and I did tour the neighborhood after going through the building. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I have never seen an area so blighted. Garbage, it's like they don't even have garbage pails, just the garbage is just put from...
Wait till the summer.
And not only that, but every street has buildings just completely abandoned, and then next door are buildings that people live in, and I'm imagine at night with the rat situation.
One question over here, please.
Exactly.
But I think, just an answer to what she had said, first visiting. The second thing is that we are going to take this hospital, the old Evangelical Deaconess Hospital in Brooklyn. Of course, I have said that if they don't move back the beds and everything they took out, I'm really going to start carrying on. I mean, to me, that was, I can't understand, with everything else, that was just the final straw. That for 2 years this building's been abandoned. No one cared about the beds. Now that someone would be able to be in the beds, the city has to move up its stands, you know. It's so typical of the attitude. The thing is that we're going to have 400 children there. I think we'll have 400 children before June. We have no money. Not only do we have no money, but no money means a lot of things. It means that even little touches, like pictures on the walls, drapes, materials, things which will make it home-like for these children, will be very hard for us to get. What we would like to do is form and we are forming, groups of women who will come out there just and help the girls, some of them sew, help them make slip-covers, help make a more home-like atmosphere. Give of self, rather. Fundraising is what...
I had a particular, when I saw you on David Sussman's program, I called that night to Channel 5 because I was so incensed about what had gone on the program. And then I called Odyssey House many times, and no one ever called me back. And I said, well, what could I do? How can I help? And I never got a call, but I did get a call last week from David Gadsden. And he said, could you please help us get some stationery supplies, some office supplies? So I said, yes, and I was really stunned that they asked, and I was thrilled. And then I hung up, and I said, I'll try and get it up there tomorrow. And then I realized, how am I going to do this? And I called back, and I said, well, exactly what do you need? And he gave me a list of things that they needed up there.
I think that one of the things you're saying suggests one of the greatest difficulties. After the thing, you see, we started off as an agency to get 60 beds. We now are going to have 620 beds, all right? It's like the family candy store. I can't say it any other way. We've got only 3 trunk lines into Odyssey House, all right? We've got the tremendous responsibility of treatment, and I've been averaging 400 calls a day, all right? It's just one of those things. I'm also decorating my house. You know, I have a husband and 3 kids. You know, it's one of these things. One of the things we probably could use well, and I was just thinking, is a group of volunteer women who would man the phones, because everyone is saying exactly the same thing. They want us to pick up things. They want us to answer. We don't even have the personnel anymore because the majority of our personnel are, first of all, only one house is funded. We are treating now 300 people on $300,000 of governmental money. We work an average of a 16-hour day. You can't get through our phones. We can't get anybody to pick anything up. You see, we have a lot of problems with drivers. You see, you can't even imagine what happens. As we took more children, we had less adults. Children can't drive cars to pick things up. Furthermore, we can only have, we couldn't get, for 6 months, we couldn't get car insurance, all right? Let me tell you the kind of subtle pressures. The house has a car for me. They have to pay at the assumed risk, though I have never had an accident because I work for a drug agency. I mean, you explain it to me. I'm the only one who drives the car. My car still isn't out of the dealer for the simple reason that I have to get assumed risk because I work for a drug agency, and I want the car in the name of the agency rather than in my own individual name for a lot of reasons. Though I pay for the car. I mean, the agency pays for the car, I pay for the car. But we can't get insurance. When you go for drivers, we can't, to get them the permission to drive because they've had narcotics history, even though everyone is tested every day on urinalysis, and no one is allowed to drink. And probably we have the safest drivers in the city because nobody is on anything at any time, and they're constantly surveyed. We can't get insurance. We can't get insurance even to insure our facilities. We pay $12,000 a year for liability insurance for our facility. Nobody pays like that just because we have the word drug addict. Even though we've never had a fire, we've never had an accident, we've never had anything. I mean, there's a constant social pressure which makes the addict the scapegoat for almost everything. I think if we can get women who will drive, women who will do pickups, women who will answer the phones, this whole kind of volunteer system might be a much better way. And we will, in fact, I just thought that we may be able to use 87th Street that way because we will have these apartments on 87th. We can set up a whole pickup and collection thing to 87th. You can't imagine what Anita and Gilmore...
What do you pick up? I mean, you're
Excuse me, I'm sorry to have to cut this short. We have time for one question.
May I pass the buttons?
Lady,
The buttons?
Dr. Gerber, before you do that,
Oh.
there is one lady.
Yeah, well, may I
who
just
wanted to
pass
ask a
the
question.
buttons around? Let me
All
tell
right,
you about
pass
the
the
buttons.
while we're-
Yeah, the buttons represent, and each button is $1. We like you to wear the buttons. The buttons represent the fact you're concerned about children. It says collation for children, and it's one meal. Each button represents one meal. Well, so take a button, whatever you, we ask for what, we think no one will be offended by.
May we have this one question, please?
I just am getting back to the very bleak feeling that you are the end product, the treaters. And I say, as an educator and somebody working with children, I have this terrible feeling that society is not about to change. It's going to be corruption and the things that we rebelled about, and these kids really have so much to rebel about. Do we have to say this epidemic has to get a hell of a lot worse before anything is taken care of, and that your services are important only because there is no prevention of this? I mean, this is the feeling I'm being left with, that no matter what workshops we have or whatever we do.
Let me answer that, the point, which I think is very important. I do not believe that prevention without being closely allied to treatment works. I just don't believe in it. And I think that prevention is like law enforcement. It's the wrong end to begin with. And let me explain exactly what I mean by that, which I think is tremendously important. First of all, we cannot accept the fact that society will remain as corrupt. If it remains as corrupt, we're going to blow ourselves up. So we really don't have any choice but to begin to change a lot of our ways of relating. When I say that, 1/3 of our budget does go into education. All right, 1/3, we have tremendous education programs. However, our education programs are intimately tied up with the entire experience of experiencing people who have been through the disease, of experienced people who have recovered. We believe that people do not learn anymore by spoon feeding. People learn only by experiencing. The best thing that I could do by being here is to get you to come to either Hunts Point or to get you to come and see the children. If you experience the children and you become motivated to begin to work and to make change, so will your children. And I can't put it any other way. You walk in and you say marijuana like masturbation dissolves your spine, and you have lost. You walk in and you begin to say that heroin, that's what some people say. Marijuana like masturbation dissolves the spine. Our children don't believe. They do not believe it. They don't, even if we say intelligent things about marijuana, they don't believe it. I mean, they don't believe anything we say anymore. In fact, we have a saying at Odyssey, it's not enough to talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. In fact, I've gotten to the point where I don't think talking the talk makes any sense at all. They don't even listen anymore. We are beginning in an age where people learn by role models and examples. They learn by what they see you doing. They learn by how they intuit the kind of person you are. And the best way, I think, of educating is exactly to get large groups. For instance, we have a marvelous letter that's posted on our website from 15 children at a public school in Brooklyn who raised $65 for our kids. And underneath it says, "We are concerned and we will not use drugs." And they raised $65.84, these 15 kids. Those 15 kids have joined together. They now have a peer group. So that if someone says turn on to pot, they can look at somebody standing next to them and say, we're not going to turn on. They're not alone. We've got to get them to bed. You can't educate in isolation, just like they're now talking in Inwood about, Inwood section, about the teachers becoming spotters, and the teachers becoming this, and the teachers becoming that. It's the wrong people. First of all, to make the teachers policemen in any sense will totally destroy the system. And of course I was quoted in the paper, and let me say I never said what I said. What I said in the paper was that I believe addiction is like tuberculosis. All people get a chest x-ray. All people should get drug urine testing. It shouldn't be the responsibility of one group in a school to spy on another. It should be just like everybody accepting the fact that anyone can become a victim of this disease. To begin to make the teachers the policemen, to begin to widen the generation gap, to begin to widen the trust relationships between teachers and pupils will be a terrible thing. And we are in for a very bad, let me say that, in fact, I had a very bad time with Burton Roberts, where he insisted that I come in and I forced the children to name the teachers and school guards they had gotten drugs from. And I said, you can't do that to the therapeutic report. Your job is policeman, my job is doctor. And this is very important. The teacher's job is to teach. The teacher's job is to communicate, not to police. The teacher can teach why drugs are wrong, but the teacher cannot get involved in turning the kids in. It's just not the relationship. There has to be a totally different kind of thing. And when it comes to education, education is important, but not unless it's tied to real experience.
I think we've really exhausted Dr. Densen-Gerber. We were very great.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.